Hello to everyone just joining us. We'll get started in just a moment. We're just giving folks another minute to join us here. Welcome to everybody who's joined us. Let's get started, and we've got a great presentation ahead of us today. My name is Becca Munich. I'm the Deputy Director at the Ecology Center, and I'll be your moderator for today's webinar. This program is scheduled to last until 6 o'clock tonight. We're going to have a presentation, and then we'll have time for your questions after that. Feel free to chat anything out to myself if you have any technical issues, or to the rest of the panelists if you have questions during, or use the question and answer feature during the presentation. Currently, we have all of our attendees in listen only mode. If at any time during the webinar, again, use that chat box to share it, or the Q&A feature, and we will get to you. After our presentation from Melissa Sargent, who I'll introduce in just a moment, we'll take those questions. So today's webinar, if you haven't already noticed, will be recorded, and the materials from today's presentation will be available on the Ecology Center website tomorrow. So to get started with the presentation, I first want to introduce our Healthy Stuff project at the Ecology Center. Our Healthy Stuff Labs is a project where we test consumer products for toxic chemicals, and also other types of environmental media, be they fish, be they soil, air quality, and things like that. Next slide, please. This Healthy Stuffs Lab has been going on for quite some time. We were one of the first nonprofits to test for lead and heavy metals in consumer products all the way back in 2006. We started by really focusing on children's products and toys at that time. And you may be familiar with some of the work that we did that led to recalls of children's toys for lead back in 2007 and 2008. Our public campaign and consumer pressure has led to bans in different states and federal recalls during that time, and then a federal new standard for lead in toys. We've been working on a number of different product categories ever since, and today's presentation is going to focus on the connection between the consumer products that are used for fertilizers and that may be contaminated with toxic PFAS chemicals. So our impacts can be seen here of this program, in that our studies and campaigns have led to 100 million, pounds of phthalates not being used in vinyl floors because of our campaigns. And those were campaigns that we did, and we were able to get Lowe's and Home Depot and Lumber Liquidators and many of these really big popular retailers to commit to moving out of toxic phthalates in their products. Over 2 billion food cans a year are now made without the toxic chemical BPA, and we continue to work to make sure that its sister chemicals, BPS, bisphenol S, and so on and so forth, don't become just substituted for BPA. For over 15 years, we've worked on children's car seats to make sure that they don't have hazardous flame retardants in them. And there's some new exciting news coming out soon about new car seats and more options that may be more affordable for families. And also moving to other things like PFAS chemicals, per and polyfluoral alpha substances, that we'll talk about tonight, and how those cannot are no longer, used in many different car seat brands. Our healthystuff.org website has over 200,000 visitors each year, so we like to keep folks really from all over the world informed on toxic chemicals in our everyday things. And our database online has over 15,000 products that we've tested. Next slide. So today I am very excited to introduce my colleague, Melissa Cooper Sargent, who's the former education director of Local Motion Green and is really continuing the work that she's done at Local Motion Green now with us here at the Ecology Center. She's been with us since I believe 2013, but since 2001, she's been educating the public about avoiding toxic chemicals in everyday things in our everyday lives, reaching really tens of thousands of people by using different platforms online, blogs, social media, print newsletters, in-person workshops, and back in the day when we could get together pre-COVID, of course, different educational fairs and things like that, which we're eager to see you all at again soon. Melissa enjoys really being able to empower people through knowledge and paving pathways to better health, and is very pleased to bring her expertise to the Ecology Center and to work with us on making sure that the heavy scientific information and studies that we do via our Healthy Stuff project are accessible to the public, and we can inform you all and empower you to take action in your own lives. Again, I am just going to hand it over to Melissa to talk a little bit more about the study and for the presentation today on toxic PFAS used and other chemicals in gardening products, particularly fertilizers. But I do want to remind you all, if you do have questions, please feel free to chat those out or use the Q&A feature in Zoom to do so. So Melissa, take it away.
Okay, thanks everybody for being here tonight. And I wanted to say that I took a chance and I'm outside in the spirit of gardening. And so forgive me if there's some background noise. We'll just kind of keep going through it. At this time, I would like to take time to remember our former Ecology Center board member, donor, and volunteer, Eleanor Marsh. She passed away on January 12th. Eleanor was a passionate and dedicated proponent of pesticide-free gardening. Each year, Eleanor would volunteer her time to share information about gardening without pesticides at our table at the Grosse Pointe Garden Club's annual garden tour. Her beautiful pesticide-free garden was even featured on the tour one year. Eleanor's yard, with its theme of all white flowers and lush greenery, and of course an attached rain barrel, was a lovely mix of casual, practical, and sophistication, much like she was. As well as a multitude of other volunteer and philanthropic endeavors, Eleanor was a founding board member of the small grassroots nonprofit organization known as Local Motion and then as Local Motion Green. The mottos of LMG were better health through fewer toxins and then healthy people, healthy planet. LMG's mission was to educate people about the connections between toxics in our environment and our health. And as a registered nurse, Eleanor understood these connections and the importance of educating others about them. Eleanor was always the first to volunteer, including opening her home to board meetings or even allowing us to use it as a backdrop for educational videos. She helped guide the small organization as it became a part of the Ecology Center in 2013 and continued to serve as board member and volunteer for the first year after the transition. There was never a dull moment with Eleanor. Her passion, wit, and vivaciousness made every conversation, meeting, or event more interesting, and she is greatly missed. The Marsh family asked that you give in her honor to the Greening of Detroit, Planned Parenthood, or any other organization that she supported. So it is in Eleanor's honor tonight that we discuss gardening without hazardous chemicals. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. So in many years when I was with Local Motion and Local Motion Green, and we were talking about green gardening and how to garden organically and avoid pesticides, we always said you got to start with an organic fertilizer rather than synthetic. That is the first step. Synthetic fertilizers are salt-based. They can kill the beneficial organisms in your soil, and your yard is more dependent on pesticides without these beneficial organisms thriving in the soil. It helps healthy soil leads to healthy plants. Next slide, please. Okay, so Natural fertilizers help make nutrients available over time and feed the beneficial organisms in the soil. They may contain blood meal, feather meal, seaweed extract, composted manure, compost, or biosolids. Now, this is not one that I would usually recommend, so let's go on to the next slide and see. So, we have waste in this country, and in every country they do. Americans generate massive quantities of waste sewage every day. Nearly half of that sewage is treated to kill pathogens and then spread on farms, pastures, wildlands for disposal, or sometimes it's made into a product such as the one you see here or many others. So there's nutrients in the sewage sludge, like nitrogen, that can help improve soil productivity. The wastewater industry and EPA call these pellets biosolids. Recycled nutrients are some other words you might hear. Go ahead on to the next slide. And so when you see biosolids packaged and sold in your local garden center, you might see some of these sort of things on the label: eco-friendly, made with recycled nutrients, claims, you know, better for your plants, community, and planet, because they're doing a service of recycling. Next slide, please. So the Ecology Center and the Sierra Club teamed up to test some of these products and see what's in them. Because with sewage sludge, you just really don't know. It could be anything that's going down our drains will end up in these products. So we purchased 9 fertilizers. Um, and there's dozens. There's dozens of products that we have found that fertilizers made from biosolids. But each one we purchased was marked with language that said eco-friendly or natural. Well, all of the products that we tested contained 2 PFAS chemicals in particular, PFOS and PFOA. Next slide. So there's been a lot of talk about PFAS lately, and I'll backtrack for a second. You see, we're going to connect a whole lot of things here, so I've already moved and touched on a whole lot of different topics. So forgive me if it seems a little disjointed, but we'll bring it all together. So PFAS stands for per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. It's a class of 10,000 or more chemicals. So it's more than just PFOA and PFAS. Those are 2 within the tens of thousands. So it's a widely used industrial chemicals, and they persist in the environment. Chemically speaking, it's a fluorine carbon bond that is the basis for all of these chemicals, and that is a very, very stable chemical bond. It's almost impossible to break this chemical bond. So for this reason, these chemicals are called forever chemicals. Now, PFAS is very useful, has been useful in providing stain repellent properties, water repellent properties, and even in firefighting foam. But we're finding that they're toxic to people and animals. Next slide, please. So in the products that we tested, we compared the levels that we found to the state of Maine's standards for agricultural soils. So the state of Maine has one of the most robust actions on PFAS in biosolids. And so they've set acceptable standard levels for the 2 chemicals that we are making note of, PFOS and PFOA. 8 of the 9 products we tested exceeded Maine's screening limits for PFOS. 3 of the 9 products we tested exceeded Maine's screening limits for PFOA. So the next slide, thank you. It will show, so these are the 9 products that we tested, and these are the amounts that we found. So you'll see in the first column is PFOA, the second column. And the ones that are in red are the ones that exceeded the screening limits. So Maine's screening limits for agricultural biosolids is 2.5 parts per billion. So you see that cured bloom, the very first one, very much exceeded that by 10 times. And they also had PFOS, and 8 out of the 9 had PFOS as well. And so the screening limit in Maine for PFOS is 5.2 parts per billion. There was only one product that did not exceed these limits. It still had both chemicals in it, but it did not exceed the Maine's limits, and that was Sinagro granulate fertilizer pellets. So next slide, please. I think somehow my header might have gotten cut off this slide. Sorry about that. So PFAS are still widely used in production and in industry. It's used in clothing and shoes, cookware, cosmetics, food packaging, and more. the question is, how does this get into from industry into our gardening? So industries are allowed to flush PFAS containing waste into wastewater drains. So when they're producing these products, there's waste. It's oftentimes the production and the disposal of these products that cause the most harm. Now, sewage treatment centers that were built 50 years ago, even though PFAS was a thing 50 years ago, we just didn't know about it. These wastewater treatment plants have no capacity to remove PFAS from our drinking water. So it's not removed, and it can go into the wastewater that is, would then go into a waterway. And some of it settles in with the solids, which is then separated out, dehydrated, and sanitized and sold as fertilizer pellets. Next slide, please. Oh, there's my heading. Okay, so this is a little bit of a graph that's kind of hard to see. So we'll just kind of go over it briefly. And these are different, this is on our website if you want to take a closer look, and it's showing different pathways of PFAS. So right here, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but up in the upper left, you'll see smokestacks, and that's industry producing shoes or Teflon pans or something of the sort. And then if you follow the downward arrow, that goes to a wastewater treatment plant, where then the waste goes directly into a river or a lake or another waterway. Oh, thank you, Laura, for the cursor. And then from there, they might also make sewage biosolids, which would then, if you follow the arrow upward, go onto a farm or your backyard or front yard. Next slide, please. So our testing provides just a snapshot. Basically, that's all that we can ever do with our testing, is provide a snapshot in time. And the wastewater system is a very complex system. So our testing provides a snapshot of PFAS levels in the wastewater system at the time that we tested. But we did find that our findings are in line with other tests, with national surveys of PFAS in sludge, biosolids, and other academic studies that tested biosolid-based fertilizers and composts. PFAS and related chemicals in sewage sludge obviously could jeopardize the safety of the food supply and home garden. So therefore, we suggest that if you do use these fertilizers, don't use them in areas where you want to grow edibles, where you're growing food or food. So whether it's annuals or perennials, thinking about some perennials like raspberries or strawberries, things that come back, you don't want to use it in there, and you also don't want to use it like in your tomato gardens or your other gardens where you are harvesting food out of those gardens. Next slide, please. So the words that we found that you can look out for are biosolids, residuals, or municipal waste. Those are ones that will indicate that it contains composted sewage sludge. Now, sometimes there's some products sold as compost that might have these. So we suggest that you contact the supplier, do a little inquiry to find out if they are using composted sewage sludge in their product. And I will say that we don't know what to do with the waste that contains the PFAS. There's really no good solution for it. When we were writing this report, there was a lot of back and forth as to what to even recommend to people, because it's the PFAS is here. So I think the best thing that we are suggesting is we got to stop it at the source, as soon as we can, eliminate all non-essential uses of PFAS and not wait another decade or two to put a halt to the production of these chemicals that are going to be with us for a very long time. And thank you. And so we're available for questions.
Great. So if folks have questions, if you want to put those in the Q&A or the chat. And we will chat out the link to this study as well, so that you can learn more about it. And I do want to let folks know that we actually collaborated on a brand new study that was released today about a different set of chemicals in bottle caps, called phthalates. And we'll chat that link out as well. And we hope to be able to provide information on that to you soon. Okay. One of the questions is, will the slides be available to us? And yes, we will be putting the presentation on the website at the Ecology Center, as well as the recording and the slides for folks, and that should be done by tomorrow. A couple of other questions here, Melissa. Can you comment on the vocabulary of organic soil? I think that, go ahead.
I would just need a little clarification.
Um, we'll give the questioner a moment um, to get back and clarify what they meant by that. But Joyce Stein has a question as well. Do you have a list of nutrients that you really would want us to look for in a fertilizer that benefits your garden? So what are the positive things to look for instead of only the negative things?
Sure. Well, any fertilizer that's sold as a garden or lawn fertilizer will have three numbers on it. The NPK, so the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. And what the one thing that I really say is, and it's actually state law that middle number be 0 because we don't need any more phosphorus. Michigan soils tend to have a good amount of phosphorus in it. And if they wash off into the lakes, it can cause algae blooms. So the only time that you are allowed to use a fertilizer with phosphorus is can't use it on the lawn. You can use it in flower gardens, or if you've received a soil test that shows that you need phosphorus, you could then use one that contains it. So it's not a heavily regulated law, but it's one that is very important. So I think that's one thing that we suggest folks look for. You need a good amount of organic matter to keep your soil happy with lots of organisms in it. So, and that helps to also keep it aerated. So that's another thing. So whether you're doing home compost or even just mulching your lawn clippings when you're mowing the lawn, that can help add some nitrogen back into your soil. So finding ways to add natural nutrients into your soil is great.
Great. We have another question. We have a bunch of questions, actually. One is that this is actually something I think I mentioned, that many different retailers and stores are not carrying certain products that now contain toxic chemicals. I think I gave the example of phthalates and vinyl flooring for Lowe's and Lumber Liquidators and Home Depot. And is there any follow through for them or accountability? And I will say, with that example, we actually went back to those stores after they promised to remove phthalates from their vinyl flooring and retested products to make sure that, even though they had pledged to go out of phthalates, to make sure that they had, and we did not find them. They were good on their pledge to do so. So we do try to follow up once a manufacturer or retailer pledges to remove certain toxic chemicals from their products. I know, Melissa, you've worked for quite some time on the car seat side of things, and I know we've done some follow-up testing with children's car seats and their pledges on toxics as well.
Right. We've been testing children's car seats for about 10 years now, maybe more. And so it's great to be able to keep checking up on them and seeing the advances. More and more are going flame retardant free and PFAS free. So we do like to check up on companies that have made their promises or their intentions to see if they followed through.
Great. Another question we have is, are there any DIY fertilizers?
Sure. I think you could find a multitude of recipes online. Compost tea. I've heard really great things about making your own compost tea. It's not something that I've tried before, but I hear that's like a superfood for the garden. Um, and so I think compost is basically your DIY fertilizer. And if you're able to do it in your own backyard with whether you have a tumbler that you put the food waste and your garden scraps in the tumbler, and or there's bins that contain it. There's all kinds of devices out there, or you can just build your own sort of structure, or or have a well-contained pile. turning it is important, and making sure it gets hot enough and making sure you have the right ratio of what they call brown to green. Um, Brown being like some of your dried plant material or straw or hay, and green being the fresh stuff that's like food scraps or green stuff from the garden.
Great. Melissa, we had another question on compost, and this one was specific to municipal compost. And tell us a little bit more about that. What about that? I know that we have heard that certain cities, like the city of Ann Arbor, have tested their compost and found some PFAS um, in the actual leachate in the compost.
Yeah, so I have definitely used municipal compost in the past when I've needed, to get large amounts when I needed more than what I was producing myself. But you don't really know exactly what's in there, and stuff is lawn debris or grass clippings are picked up from other people's properties where maybe there's pesticides used also. So, you know, it's you do have some level of uncertainty by using that. So, and I guess if you're like thinking about Ann Arbor where they have found PFAS, I think talking to your city or the government level that's providing the compost is probably your best bet. Asking them if they've tested, asking what they found. Um, yeah, I think communication is always key. And one reason why we always promote communication to anybody, whether it's a manufacturer or government, it's because it lets them know that you care. We've heard from school systems where they're using pesticides, and we say, well, parents don't want this. And they say, well, we don't get any complaints about pesticides. We don't get any questions about pesticides. We only get parents complaining about the weeds. So they really listen when people write a letter, make a phone call, send an email inquiring. It just indicates that you care about an issue.
I think the other thing I would just add on the compost side of things is we've been doing a lot of work on the policy side and the market side to make sure that certain materials like the molded fiber compostable bowls and plates and things like that, that the standards for those have been changed to not allow PFAS chemicals. Those were used to like add that sort of moisture control and water resistance to those, and now they're using safer alternatives, BPI and World Centric, some of the bigger Cedar Grove, some of the bigger companies and certifiers for those products have all moved away from PFAS as of 2020. There may be some stuff still on store shelves, of course, that's older, but we hope that those levels in municipal compost will go down as a result.
And
Another question. Oh, go ahead.
I was
Sorry.
gonna add that if you've put like compostable plates or cups or forks and stuff in your own home compost, you could have PFAS in your own home.
It's true. Yeah, definitely. Um, so there's a question here about the screening limits that you mentioned in Maine. Were those specifically for fertilizers? Have any other states set any screening limits for fertilizers that you know of?
Those were for biosolids on agricultural soils. So thinking about farmers and what they're allowed to use in Maine. They have Maine has the most robust and strictest standards. I'm not sure, Becca, maybe you might know. I'm not sure what other standards are in other states.
I'm not certain off the top of my head, but I think we usually tend to look to Maine right now, and new standards happen every year, and we can update our knowledge, if a new state passes a policy. But right now, I do think that Maine has the higher standards. So we heard back from Hitomi about the organic soil question, and that is that many different products are packaged and sold as topsoil, and local stores are selling these products and labeling them as organic soil. The
Okay.
question is, can it contain PFAS?
Um, that's a very good question. So thinking about that question in general, back before PFAS was even a known issue, um, in a lot of labeling of a lot of products, uh, manufacturers can say pretty much whatever they want. So they can use the words organic, without much being backed up on there. And so I would always tell people to look for the USDA organic seal. And that means it's gone through some testing, it has to meet certain standards. And so that's the thing that I would look for if you're looking for organic. It might have, um, there's third party certifications such as the OMRI. That's a certification that you can look for to, so it shows that the manufacturer, their products have been certified organic. Um, I am not sure though if the organic standards include PFAS. So that's a good question.
I think that the pesticides, so some pesticides are have PFAS as an ingredient in them, and those would not be allowed under organic standards. However, the soil, like we said, if it is enriched with compost that's contaminated, it may, because it's not intentionally something that's added. I'm not sure that that wouldn't be a potential contaminant that we don't necessarily know about. So that's a good point there. So, organic is going to protect you from those intentionally added harmful pesticides that might be on whatever was on the soil before, but not necessarily things that maybe that would meet those standards and are just inadvertently contaminating. Okay. Are there specific brands of fertilizers or types of fertilizers and pesticides that you know of that you would recommend folks use?
Are there types of pesticides that I would recommend folks use?
Or fertilize, yeah, or
Um,
fertilizers.
Sure. Yes, I mean you can definitely find natural fertilizers out there. They don't have to tell you the ingredients, but if they want you to know, they'll tell you. So you can look at the bag and see if it has words that you recognize, like I mentioned at the beginning, like feather meal or blood meal. These would be byproducts of oftentimes the meat industry, but it's using the whole animal. So, um, or just eggshells might be in there. So read the ingredients, see if they look like actual things that are natural. Um, and there are definitely certain brands out there that are that I would rely on and that I would trust. So fertilizers, and there's more and more natural pesticides also. Oftentimes peppermint oil might be used. And so, but there's also recipes for making your own. If you're thinking about like weeds in the concrete, those are some of the easiest ones to handle because a lot of the natural herbicides, herbicide being a pesticide that kills plants, natural herbicides oftentimes are non-selective. And so if you're going to spray like vinegar on a weed, you're going to want to protect the plants that you do want. Um, and so like if it's in a sidewalk crack, that's really easy to handle. I just throw that out there. But yeah, there's a lot of DIY recipes and there's more and more products out there. Neem oil is another product that can be used. So the world is vast. So I could put together some resources, or we do have some on our website. But yeah, there's definitely good ones out there.
Great. It would seem like people also could look for pesticides at their home improvement stores, gardening stores that are approved for use in certified organic gardening and agriculture too, right?
Yes, yes,
And fertilizers, I would assume as well.
yes.
Another question we have is, does Michigan have any standards like Maine? And has any testing been done to show if PFAS is absorbed by plants? And if so, where can we find that data?
Um, yes, I would say that I don't have it offhand, so I would be happy to get back with you on that. But I believe, being all the concerns that we have, that there is evidence showing that it gets into the plants and then it can be eaten. We do not have the same kind of standards for agricultural soils that Maine does. We do have drinking water standards, and Becca personally worked on that this past year. So I don't know, Becca, if you want to talk any more about that.
Yeah, and I will just say that it's something, the standards for biosolids and sewage sludge is something that we're working on. We actually have a bunch of meetings set up with different legislators in the Michigan legislature next week to talk about this issue and to begin educating them and suggesting that we need strong standards here as well for sewage sludge and biosolids and making sure they don't contain toxic PFAS and other chemicals. And as Melissa said, Michigan has what's called a maximum contaminant level for seven different types of PFAS chemicals. And this was finalized in August of last year. Two of those we have really our strongest in the nation standards. The other five, we are hoping that we can have stronger standards going forward, but we're happy that we have a big group of them. I was just on a call earlier today, and other states are starting to put these different policies together. And we also have learned that the EPA is looking to strengthen the standards on a number of different PFAS chemicals found in water, and that will help all of these different product categories. So, or sorry, environmental media. So we need stronger standards in Michigan for things like biosolids. We have some good water standards, drinking water standards right now, which are going to be translated into groundwater cleanup standards. And there's many other things that we're concerned about, and we hope that we'll have stronger standards for our fish advisories and things like that in the next couple of years. We have a really specific question, so I'm going to test your gardening knowledge here, Melissa. Do you know what a good thing to use for insects, for cucumber insects, that's healthier than some of the other alternatives? Or if anybody else knows on the chat and you want to chat that in, that would be great.
Yeah, that's when I would give these talks, I would always get questions about specific pests, and I would oftentimes rely on the audience because somebody would say, "Oh yeah, I've had that same one. This is what I
Yeah.
do for it." And so if anybody has dealt with the cucumber beetles, and yeah,
Okay, well, we'll see if there's anything that comes through the chat on that. Oh, there's a question about where we can find more about the Michigan standards on PFAS that you were describing. That is a terrific question. So the kind of one-stop shop for where sites that are contaminated with PFAS have been identified in Michigan, where our drinking water standards could be found, and other information is the Michigan PFAS Action Response Team, and we'll put the link to that in here, or MPART for short. And this is a multi-department effort of our state government that is really looking to do testing of PFAS in different environmental media, identify contaminated sites, work on cleanup plans, figure out what the standards should be for our drinking water and for other types of environmental media. So we'll chat that out in just a moment with that site information. That'll have that for you to look at. I'm just going to scroll through and look and see if there are any other questions. We'll give folks just a moment. Oops. Yes, we have the right website. Laura, can you chat that out? Terrific. Any other questions that folks have for Melissa? Great. Well, thank you so much, Melissa, for presenting. And I know we have a few more things that we want to mention before we wrap up. Did you want to cover this, or do you want me to?
well, and I was going to say it's a lovely evening here where I am. So if you all will give you a little more time to get in your garden tonight.
Yeah.
Yeah. And generally on these EcoChat Live events, we do ask for your support. That's what keeps us going. But in honor of Eleanor Marsh, her family has asked folks donate to Greening of Detroit. She was also a longtime avid board member on Greening of Detroit, or also Planned Parenthood, or any of the other organizations that she supports. So just want to say thank you very much for being here with us tonight, and for the good conversation.
Great. Thank you, everyone. I do see one final question, and unfortunately, I don't have a good answer for you, Susan. The question is there any cooking method that minimizes PFAS in food? And unfortunately, there really isn't. The PFAS is there unless you happen to be in a place that has contaminated water, and then obviously not using that water and making sure you have filtration either with a strong granular activated carbon filter or a reverse osmosis filter if your water in your municipality or your well water is contaminated with PFAS. Great. So we just chatted out where you can find those slides.
About
Go
your
ahead, sorry. We just chatted out where you can find those slides. Sorry. Great. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. And I think we were having a little bit of an issue there with some of our sound. I hope that everything else worked out well. Thank you for joining us, and we will have more information about our future panels coming up on our website. And you can see ecocenter.org, Ecology Center Live for the recordings of our past events and upcoming Ecology Center Live webinars. Thank you.
Thank you.